Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I am your host Deepak. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Andrew V. Abela with us today. Dr. Andrew Abela is the founding dean of the Bush School of Business and an ordinary professor of marketing at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. He is affiliated with the Harvard University Human Flourishing Program and contributes to Forbes.com. His research focuses on marketing ethics, Catholic social doctrine, and internal communication, with publications in notable journals such as the Journal of Marketing and the Journal of Business Ethics. A recipient of the 2009 Novak Award for contributions to the study of religion and economic liberty, Dr. Abela is the author of two recent books, Super Habits, The Universal System for a Successful Life, and A Catechism for Business. Dr. Abela holds a BSc from the University of Toronto and MBA from the Institute of Management Development IMD in Switzerland, and a PhD in Marketing and Ethics from the Darden Business School at the University of Virginia. In this episode, Professor Abela will share valuable insights from his newly published book, Super Habits, The Universal System for a Successful Life. I invite you to join me in welcoming Professor Andrew V. Abela to our podcast. We eagerly anticipate his valuable insights on the topic. Professor Andrew Abela, a true welcome to this podcast episode.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you.
Professor Abela, can you provide a brief overview of Super Habits and what inspired you to write this book?
Thank you. I've been teaching here in our business school for 12 years. Our business school is 12 years old. We noticed something about our students. When we created our business school, we wanted very much to graduate students for whom kind of business success wasn't just about money, but it was also about human flourishing in its totality. So we want them to be financially successful, but we want them to be socially and personally successful as well. And so from the very beginning, we were teaching ethics and principles, and since we're a Catholic university, something called Catholic social doctrine. But we realized it started to become clear after a number of years that it's not enough to teach people principles. You have to get them into the habit of living those principles. Because while people will sometimes act against their values or their principles, they will rarely, if ever, act contrary to their habits. So the secret seemed to be cultivating these right habits. So I embarked on extensive amount of research and found a number of different literatures that were converging. So, for example, in management consulting, I noticed that both Deloitte and McKinsey and Company had published papers where they said that it's not enough for employees to have the right skills, but they also need they need a set of underlying human capabilities like courage and self-discipline and generosity and gratitude and creativity and so on. So that was very interesting. And then I saw that in positive psychology, they were studying these same capabilities like courage and self-discipline and gratitude and generosity and so on. And then I also recognized those as what the ancient philosophers called the virtues, which many ancient traditions from ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the Hebrew scriptures, Christianity, Islam, a whole wide range of religions had this concept of the virtues or these habits of excellence. And so it seemed like this convergence was going on. And it's exactly, I think, what our society and what our businesses need right now, which is what are a common set of habits that everybody could benefit from. And not just any habits, because then the final convergence was with this tremendous explosion in interest in habits themselves. Fabulous books like Atomic Habits, for example, or The Power of Habit, James Clear and Charles Duhigg, respectively. But the step we're going, sort of building on what they did to say, those books are all about how to grow in habits. What we now need to talk about is which habits specifically. And it is specifically habits of courage and self-discipline and generosity and gratitude and so on. So that's what I wanted to do with the book, is show how all these different literatures converge and then what it can mean for individuals and for companies and for society.
Insightful. You describe certain ancient Roman and Greek virtues as superpower habits. So, how did you define these super habits and what role do they play in enhancing human performance and happiness?
It's a great question. I refer to them as superpower habits because, and we see this specifically from the positive psychology research over the last 2 to 3 decades. Something remarkable happens when a human being grows in any one of these particular habits. So, for example, there have been studies on gratitude, the habit of giving thanks, and so they'll do a control study where they'll have the test group will keep a daily gratitude diary. So that's been shown to be a good way to grow in gratitude. Every day, write down the things you are grateful for, maybe at the end of each day. What they found over a short number of maybe 2 or 3 months, where the test group is keeping a gratitude diary, the control group is not. The test group starts to experience greater happiness, greater mental health, and greater physical health. So things like anxiety and depression are reduced. Even chronic physical pain is reduced just because of growing in gratitude. And like that, there are several others. And this research, and the theme seems to be as follows. Almost in every possible in every one of these superpower habits, what I call the super habits, with any habit, as you grow in that habit, the thing that you're doing becomes easier. So if you have the habit of making your bed each morning, once it's a habit, it's easier to make your bed. You don't have to use up any willpower. You just do it. That's what it means to have a habit, right? So that's regular habits, but the super habits go a step beyond that. They not only make the thing you're doing easier, but they make you happier in a lasting way, not just a temporary pleasure, but they make you happier. They make you healthier, as I mentioned, with gratitude. And most importantly, the difference between a super habit and a regular habit is the scope of the super habit is so much wider. So if you have the habit of making your bed, then that habit is good for making your bed and nothing else. But if you have the habit of courage, so I say this to our students, so when they play football, American football, right? There's a lot of physical activity that goes on. You can get hit badly and so on. But when they cultivate the super habit of courage on the football field, they can use that same courage in an interview or in a speech, or in tackling a difficult challenge. So that's, I think, the real mark of these superpower habits is they are so much more portable than regular habits. Yeah.
Based on multiple studies, you have referenced a variety of empirical research throughout this book. So, what were some of the most surprising or unexpected findings that stood out to you during this process?
The unexpected findings were first the physical health benefits that I gave you an example with generosity, because even the ancient philosophers, as far back as Aristotle, was saying that as you grow in these virtues, these habits of excellence, these super habits, you will become happier. So we've known that for 3,500 years. But the health benefits, I don't think we knew that. And it's not just generosity. What really caught my attention is as I started to read across the different, the positive psychology calls them character strengths. I don't like the word strengths as much because it makes it seem like it's something that you're given rather than something that you can cultivate. So I prefer habits because I think that's what they are. It's more accurate. But as you grow whether it be generosity or it be gratitude or it be creativity or it be orderliness, whatever one you name, and in my book I identify 50 of them, 50, that in almost every case, almost without exception, not only are they making you happier, but they're making you healthier as well. In some of them, like there's one of these is the super habit of restraint, which kind of helps you be in the habit of saying no to things that aren't wise to do or good for you. You can say, okay, I see how that would be healthy because it stops you from overindulging in food, for example, But in other ones like generosity, for example, how does generosity make you physically healthier? somehow it seems to do that. That's what the research tends to suggest. So that was a really big surprise. The other big surprise was just how consistent these findings were across many different super habits. That it's not just, well, this super habit is really good and this one not so much. There's just like this wide range of super habits, and you the same or similar empirical findings in each case. It's really tremendous.
Okay, very nice. Dr. Andrew, you mentioned that the book includes engaging stories. Can you share one or two stories that particularly resonate with the central theme of super habits?
Yes, sure. In every chapter, I give a number of stories to try to to make it interesting to read, but I find that it's a better way to teach some of these things by looking at a real life story. So one of the early ones, one of the earlier chapters, is a story that I tried to show, because I think the biggest obstacle to people understanding what the power of super habits is the assumption that you have a fixed having a fixed mindset, where you think that the characteristics you have are pretty much set by the time you're in your adulthood, But we now know through brain science that the brain is very neuroplastic, right? That's the phrase we use, neuroplasticity, which means it doesn't matter what your age is, you can always be improving. And so this assumption that you either have a particular strength or you don't. I tell a story about a teenager, and this is in a chapter on restraint. And this teenager is very unrestrained. He's a big guy, physically strong, and he gets into fights a lot and he steals a lot. His family is poor. Whenever he wants something, he steals it. Whenever somebody annoys him, he fights him, So bad story, unfortunately repeated many times, in our society. And you can see this is not going to end well. But something differently happens in this guy. His nickname is Dewey. So Dewey, yet another time, his mother comes to pull him out of the police station because he was caught stealing again. And the mother starts crying and says, "Could you just stop?" And Dewey's lying in bed later that night and thinking, my mother has a very tough life and I'm just making it worse. I need to stop. I need to do something about that. So was that change of mind, but then helped with a couple of coaches at his high school who really tried to pay attention to him and help him. He started to play football for his high school and wrestling, and he was very successful in both, so much so because when he'd have these frustrations or desires he was able to start to learn to restrain them and redirect them. So instead of going and fighting somebody, just take that energy onto the football field and use that energy there instead, or same for wrestling. Anyway, so successful that he spent a year, he was recruited into the NFL, the National Football League. But he did that for a year, didn't go beyond a year. Then he went into wrestling and was very successful in wrestling, had a terrific career in wrestling, then went on to Hollywood, had a successful acting career, and we know him as Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And so it's a terrific story of somebody who starts out without restraint, cultivates the super habit of restraint, and is phenomenally successful. So that's one good example. So,
yeah, thank you for sharing, Dr. Andrew Abela. Professor, what challenges do individuals typically face when trying to develop these super habits, and how can they overcome them?
So the biggest challenge is the repetition. If you want to build any kind of habit, you need to just be repeating it regularly. And so oftentimes we get all enthusiastic and we set up a goal and we say, I'm going to do something, and after 3 or 4 days it just peters away, and it just reinforces a negative self-impression that, I can't do anything right, So the trick is to pick something that is new but small enough that you'll be capable of doing it every day. Because as you do it every day, it becomes a habit, new neural pathways are created, and so it then becomes easier, and then you can layer on another new thing that is also very simple. So the way to overcome the challenge is pick something as easy as possible that you can credibly do every single day.
Okay. In your research, how has these super habits been linked to increase happiness and well-being?
In two ways that I see. One is just from the effects that I mentioned before, that somehow activating these super habits brings us to a kind of a better place humanly, so that we tend to be happier. We're not sure exactly why, but it seems to me, all the evidence suggests, both because of the thousands of years tradition of these super habits, what I'm calling super habits, and the extensive empirical research today, that these aren't random skills that we can add or not, that they are in a sense pre-existing. Think of them as psychological muscles. You know, a joke I like to make is that if you've ever tried a new sport or some new physical exercise, and at the end of the day you say, oh my gosh, muscles that I didn't even know I had are hurting me, you know. The super habits, these virtues, are kind of like psychological muscles that many people don't even know they had. Somebody who is very fearful, for example, may not think of themselves as courageous, but they have a courage muscle in there. It just needs to be exercised. And so once you start exercising it, you start feeling more psychologically fit, in the same way that once you start exercising your muscles, you start to feel more physically fit. So that's the first way, I think, in which people get happier. And then the second is a much more practical way, because as you build each of these super habits, you start to become simultaneously more effective at what you're doing, but things are also easier. So if you are, pick another one, the super habit of orderliness, which is putting right things in the right order and right places, makes it easier for you to be more organized. And so in every case, it takes a piece of life and makes that part of life easier and more effective at the same time. So it makes it easier and more effective to be grateful, easier and more effective to be just, even easier and more effective in being self-disciplined. So it's like just life just keeps getting better in both ways, you know. So of course you'd be happy, right? So why wouldn't you be happy if that's what happened? So
Yeah. Uh, Doctor, how has these super habits influenced your own life and professional journey?
so for me, I think it's helped me get some focus in terms of where I need to be improving next. You know, I have to say I've been blessed with a very good life, and I think a successful career. So I'm the founding dean of our business school. I've been in academia for 22 years. I was a management consultant with McKinsey and Company for a while. I was a brand manager with Procter and Gamble. Married for 27 years. My wife and I have raised 6 children. I've started a couple of businesses along the way. So I've been busy, but things have gone, I think, reasonably well. But I'm always looking for kind of, how do I improve? How do I grow? And what the whole super habits concept has given me is sort of a map of human flourishing and where to focus. So if I could just wave this in front of the screen, the book Super Habit, everyone comes with this. You've seen this, of course, the anatomy of virtue, we call it, but it's a diagram with all the 50 super habits on it, and it shows how they all fit together. And the reason we draw it as a circle is it is complete. It just shows the entirety of a human life. And so wherever somebody may be struggling with something, there's going to be a super habit that if they start practicing it a little bit every day, that part of their life is going to become easier and more successful at the same time.
Yeah. Dr. Andrew, why do you think the ancient virtues from Roman and Greek traditions are still relevant today? How can they be adapted to modern challenges?
I think because even though it's 3,000 years ago, in some cases 3,000 years ago, the some of the fundamental many of the fundamental challenges to being human are the same, and if you want to make an evolutionary argument, in 2,000 years, that's a blink of an eye. That we have a hard. I mean, I don't think they're physically any different than we are now. And so they're human beings. We're human beings. These are psychological muscles that they had that we have. So we all had the potential to do that. And so I looked particularly in the book at the case of Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, who was a Stoic emperor. So a philosopher, he wrote about the Stoic virtues. So he wrote about these super habits. And look at the world that he was dealing with. He had to face a major pandemic that killed a lot of his citizens. He had war in the Middle East. This is sounding familiar. He had issues of church and state fighting each other, even though he's technically was head of both his church and the state. So even though looks different to us, there's tremendous amount of similarities from ancient times to today. And sometimes I think we're too quick to reject what has been tested over thousands of years for something that's new. But here's something I think that has survived the test of millennia and is very relevant today. And the modern psychological science shows the relevance, proves the relevance. It's just not just an act of faith that you're taking. You're just like, the science says this stuff really works for us today. So
Yeah. What do you foresee as the future of personal development and habit formation? Are there any emerging trends or research areas that excite you?
yes, a couple. I think one is, I think, in terms of habit formation, I suspect this is only going to get stronger. There was the popular books I mentioned have been very, very popular, I think, because people realize how powerful are habits. But this summer, there was a landmark study that compared habit formation versus other approaches to behavior change. So knowledge or emotion or attitudes, and habit outperforms all of them. It seems to be the strongest way to drive new behaviors. So that research, I think, will continue and will continue to grow. What I'm hopeful for is one area that I find interesting is we talk about strengths and we talk about habits. I think it would be good to start making a division between the strengths or the talents that we have that almost feel like they're genetic, not really changeable, or not good use of your time to try to change them. And these would include things like extroversion or introversion. We seem to be somewhat, that may shift over decades, but we tend to have preferences one way or another. Those seem to be reasonably stable. Whereas the habits, the super habits, are much more plastic. You can develop them, you can lose them, but you can develop them, and you keep practicing them, you keep them. And I think understanding that distinction would be helpful, I think, for our research.
Dr. Abela, my last question. After reading Super Habits, what are some of the next steps you recommend for our listeners who want to dwell deeper into the personal growth?
So an immediate next step, in fact, so immediate you could even do this before reading the book. In the back of the book is a QR code, and we have developed the Super Habits app. But you actually don't even need the book for it. You could just go to superhabits.app and try it out. It's a free app, and it does two things. First, it gives you a survey, a series of questions that will then help you get rated on how you're doing on each of the super habits to see where what are strong for you and which ones you might want to improve in. And it will tell you a bit more about the benefits of improving and so on. And then the second thing it does is it has an AI coach, which via the app or via text, each day first will help you choose what's the easy practice you want to do every day. Then each day it will text you a reminder, a suggestion. And then if you want to tweak the thing that you're practicing, you can dialogue with the coach, and it will suggest changes and so on. And you can let it know when you did the practice, or will track your streaks for you and so on. So that, as I said, there's a QR code in the book. So that'll be the immediate way to implement what's in the book. Or you can just try it out even before getting the book, superhabits.app.
Yeah. To our listeners, thank you for joining us for this enlightening episode with Dr. Andrew V. Abela. We were thrilled to have him share his expertise and insights from his newly published book, Super Habits, The Universal System for a Successful Life. We hope you found this conversation inspiring and that it encourages you to explore the concepts discussed today. Don't forget to check out Dr. Abela's book and mobile app for more insights and strategies for success. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Thank you so much, Dr. Andrew Abela, for joining with us today.
My pleasure.